Mersed.com. And what I wanted to focus on today was not so much the ethical argument on why compulsion by the state is bad. I think the ethical case kind of paints itself. People shouldn't be forced to do things. But I wanted to paint the pragmatic or practical reason why you want things to be voluntary. Okay, there's a very difference in a voluntary interaction versus a forced interaction. Okay, take a look at a relationship between a romantic relationship. Okay, for a relationship to occur, both people have to volunteer to participate in it. And what happens? This creates an incentive for both people to try to get the other person to volunteer into the relationship, meaning they have to earn each other's affection. And this generates a positive incentive on both sides. Okay, now generally this begins to dissipate after it becomes compulsory, basically when you have the legal contract into it, aka the legal contract called marriage. I'm not saying marriage itself. To me, the marriage is sort of the voluntary bond, while the contract is just a legal obligation. And once you put a legal obligation on yourself, it changes the dynamic, the voluntary dynamic that made the relationship work in the first place. Because the idea is that as long as there's no compulsory bond, the only way for this relationship to maintain itself is for both people to constantly be making the case to each other on why they should continue to be in a relationship. This should be the same relationship you have with a governing institution or with your rules, etc. Not only because it's ethical, but it breeds better governance. Because if the government has to convince you why you should be a member of it, why you should volunteer to follow its rules and pay its taxes, okay, then it has to focus on how to produce value for you. It has to focus on being worth it to you. Okay, so it has to basically make the case. And as it makes the case, it really sits down and is forced to look at self and determine, kind of like in a relationship, you're forced to look at yourself and figure out, okay, what's good and what are the things I need to work on, and what are the things that I should emphasize. And in the same case, you would see that same thing with governance. Okay, those who govern would have to sit there and figure out what's good about me, what's bad about me, and how can I make myself better for you. Now, if I don't have to worry, if I can just take that tax money, if I can just force you to follow my rules, the incentive to have that kind of reflection isn't there. Okay? Again, we can see this dynamic in compulsory social relationships. Okay? You know, you see this a lot with maybe arranged marriages in other cultures, where there might necessarily be more violence towards women. And again, it's not because of the necessarily compulsory marriage, but it doesn't hurt if you know that your wife can't leave you. If you know, you're not going to necessarily treat her as well. Okay, so generally a lot of these relationships where you see a lot of violence is because a lot of times because even if there isn't violence involved, the other person, as far as coercion, I mean, sometimes domestic violence occurs because one person, for other reasons, may seem that they're not free to leave the relationship, whether it be because legal obligations, family obligations, children, whatever. Okay? So in that case, it enables the other partner to no longer have to make the case on why they should stay, and it makes it easier for them to sort of take advantage of the other party. And this is how it should be for all relationships. That's why all relationships should be voluntary. It's sort of the practical side of voluntarism. If everybody has to find ways to make the case to others to participate in relationships, in different institutions, etc., then everyone is always constantly trying to produce the most value they can for others. Because basically, if the only way we're going to cooperate is voluntarily, the only way you're going to want to cooperate with me is if I'm producing value. You force people to cooperate, you reduce the need to make the case to others. It's all about making the case. So, hopefully you found this sort of thought